As I sat at the heavy oak desk within the Scriptorium of the Imperial Library of Constantinople, the cold autumn rain began to fall against the high leaded windows. The storm outside was a distant, muted murmur, a soft rhythm that seemed to isolate this sanctuary from the rest of the empire. Before me lay a collection of weathered vellum manuscripts, their edges darkened by centuries of candlelight and the delicate touch of long-forgotten scholars. My fingers traced the raised ink of the Greek script, a philosophical treatise copied down during the reign of Emperor Justinian, preserved here, untouched by the slow decay of time. The air in the room was thick with the comforting scent of old parchment, dried lavender, and beeswax candles that flickered gently in the drafts. The silence of the library was profound, broken only by the steady, soothing scratch of my own quill as I made notations in the margins of my ledger. Each stroke of the pen was deliberate, a slow and rhythmic movement that mirrored the steady downpour against the stone walls outside. I looked up toward the vaulted ceilings, where the shadows danced softly among the grand arches, concealing thousands of scrolls and codices stacked high upon the cedar shelves. It was easy to lose track of the hours in a place such as this, where the modern world seemed to recede entirely, leaving only the timeless pursuit of ancient wisdom and the quiet comfort of isolation. I reached for a heavy leather volume bound in dark calfskin, its spine cracked with the venerable lines of age. As I opened it, a faint cloud of dust caught the golden light of the desk lamp, floating lazily through the air before settling once more. This text detailed the forgotten architecture of the city, the hidden aqueducts, and vaulted cisterns that rested silently beneath the bustling streets above. Reading through the elegant prose, I felt a deep sense of calm washing over me, a realization that generations had sat in this very alcove, listening to the same rain, seeking the same quiet refuge from the chaos of their daily lives. The knowledge held within these walls was an anchor, steady and unchanging through the passing centuries. The candle beside my ledger burned low, its flame perfectly still and casting a warm, amber glow across the workspace. Outside, the twilight deepened into a rich, velvety indigo, turning the window panes into dark mirrors that reflected the rows of books stretching far into the gloom. I turned another page, the heavy parchment settling with a soft, satisfying rustle that seemed to echo faintly in the empty hall. There was no urgency here, no demand for haste, only the peaceful continuity of the text and the slow, hypnotic rhythm of the night. Moving away from the desk, my footsteps made no sound upon the ancient flagstones. As I walked deeper into the labyrinth of shelves, the scent of cedar wood grew stronger here, a rich, grounding aroma that felt like an embrace from history itself. I held a small brass lantern before me, its light cutting a narrow path through the gathering dark, revealing row upon row of lost thoughts, bound in leather and silk. Here lay the works of the old poets, the astronomers who mapped the stars from towers long since fallen, and the chroniclers who recorded the rise and fall of ancient kings. To hold their words in the quiet of the night is to understand how fragile and yet how enduring our human stories truly are. I stopped before a section dedicated to the lost libraries of the East, scrolls rescued from the flames of Alexandria and the ruins of Antioch. The ink on these pages was different, a deep indigo blue made from ground lapis lazuli that still shimmered faintly under the lantern light. I carefully pulled a single scroll from its cedar tube, the papyrus dry and delicate, rustling like autumn leaves in my hands. As I unrolled it, the elegant letters revealed a map of the night sky, drawn by a scholar in the 3rd century, who sat under the same stars that now lay hidden behind the storm clouds outside. The continuity of thought, the quiet transmission of wonder across 1,000 years, profound sense of peace. Further down the corridor, the shelves grew taller, their peaks lost in the heavy gloom of the upper rafters. I passed collections of early mathematical diagrams, geometries sketched by lamplight in Athens, and medical journals compiled by physicians in ancient Persia. Every volume was a monument to human curiosity, a quiet defiance against the forgetting nature of time. I adjusted the wick of my lantern, the flame flaring slightly and throwing long, distorted shadows of the bookcases across the stone floor. The world outside might be caught in the throes of political upheaval and passing seasons, but here, within this grid of timber and ink, time had ground to a beautiful, stationary halt. I found a small, wooden stool tucked away in an intersection of the history aisles. Sitting down for a brief moment, I rested the heavy scroll on my knees, simply absorbing the weight of the silence. It was a dense, heavy, quiet, the kind that only exists when millions of written words are resting together in a single locked room. I closed my eyes, listening to the distant, muffled cadence of the rain hitting the roof far above. The sound was an acoustic blanket, a repetitive, soothing frequencies that seemed to slow my pulse and clear away the lingering clutter of the day. Descending a narrow flight of stone steps, the air grew noticeably cooler, carrying the crisp, damp scent of subterranean earth and ancient stone. I had entered the lower vaults, where the oldest blueprints of the empire were kept secure from the light of day. The walls here were rough-hewn rock, supporting massive arches that held up the immense weight of the library above. I laid the lantern upon a stone slab, unfurling a thick parchment map that outlined the deep foundations of the city, its secret pathways and forgotten chambers. Tracing the faded red ink of the draftsman, I could hear the faint, rhythmic echo of water dripping somewhere deep within the dark, a steady, natural clock ticking away the centuries in complete isolation. Every cross-section drawn on this map spoke of an obsessive precision, lines drawn by lamplight beneath the surface of the earth, lifetimes ago. I ran my palm over the cold surface of the parchment, feeling a profound connection to the architects who built this city of stone and shadow. They had labored in silence, just as I was laboring now, creating spaces meant to outlast empires. The deep quiet of the vault enveloped me like a heavy blanket, slowing my breath, grounding my thoughts, and turning the act of study into a form of silent meditation. In the corner of this lower vault sat a heavy iron-bound chest, its lock rusted shut by decades of subterranean humidity. Beside it lay fragments of broken clay jars, the ancient vessels used to transport delicate scrolls across the Mediterranean long before the library itself was even built. I knelt beside the chest, my lantern casting a low, raking light across the flagstones, revealing the faint inscriptions carved into the lid. It was an inventory list from an era before the great restructuring, a catalogue of texts that had crossed deserts and oceans to find a permanent home in this stone fortress. The damp cold of the vault began to seep through my heavy wool coat, a gentle reminder of the physical world outside this intellectual sanctuary. Yet, I found myself hesitant to leave the subterranean quiet. Down here, 20 feet beneath the earth, the external world ceased to exist entirely. There were no empires, no markets, no passing hours, only the structural honesty of stone arches and the enduring survival of human thought. I carefully rolled the architectural map back into its protective leather sleeve, tied the linen cord, and prepared to ascend back to the warmth of the scriptorium. I climbed back up the stone steps, returning to the warm, familiar enclosure of my desk in the main scriptorium. The rain outside picked up, a sudden sheet of water sweeping across the courtyard. rattling the heavy glass panes with a rhythmic intensity. But inside, under the thick stone vaults, the sound was transformed into a deep, comforting hum, like the murmur of a great world asleep. I sat down once more, setting the lantern aside, and allowed myself to simply listen to the cadence of the storm. There is a unique solace in being entirely alone with the past, protected from the currents of the present by walls that have stood for a millennium. The ink on my ledger had long since dried, a permanent record of my journey through the thoughts of minds that had turned to dust long ago. I reached for a small porcelain cup of tea, now gone cold, and took a slow sip, the bitterness grounding me in the immediate reality of the workspace. The single candle had melted down into an abstract sculpture of hardened wax, its flame dancing with a fragile, hypnotic rhythm as a soft draft moved through the cracks of the window frame. I watched the smoke rise in a thin, silver ribbon, disappearing into the darkness of the vaulted ceiling above. Beneath the ledger lay a forgotten bundle of letters, tied with a frayed silk ribbon that had faded from crimson to a dull, dusty rose. These were the personal correspondences of a former librarian, written during a time of great winter freezes centuries ago. Reading his elegant, flowing cursive, he spoke of the difficulty of keeping the ink from freezing in the well, and how his fingers grew stiff as he copied the works of Plato by the light of a single oil lamp. His complaints were comfortingly human, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge has always required a quiet, stubborn endurance against the elements. I took up my quill once more, the iron nib catching the amber lamplight as I dipped it into the dark inkwell. I began to translate a small fragment of the text I had brought up from the lower vaults, a poetic description of the morning sun rising over the Bosporus. The contrast between the bright, golden imagery of the words and the dark, rainy reality of my current surroundings was beautiful. Each word I translated felt like retrieving a sunken treasure from the bottom of an ocean of time, bringing it back into the light of the living world, if only for my own solitary eyes to see. I leaned back into the worn leather chair, closing my eyes for a brief moment, letting the ambient textures of the library wash over me. The distant drip of water from a high stone gutter, the faint, structural creak of the wooden shelves adjusting to the evening humidity, the soft sigh of the wind in the chimney. These were the sounds of the archive at midnight, a symphony of preservation designed to quiet the restless mind and soothe the weary spirit. Every book on these shelves was a silent guardian, keeping watch over the night, ensuring that nothing precious would be lost to the dark. As the early hours of the morning approached, the intensity of the storm began to wane, leaving behind a soft, misty drizzle that blanketed the city in silence. The candles had burned down to pools of warm wax, their light fading into the first faint gray of dawn creeping through the eastern windows. My long watch was coming to an end, yet I felt no weariness, only a deep, settled tranquility that seemed to vibrate within the very stones of the room. The library would soon wake. Other scholars would come to sit in these chairs, but for now, the sanctuary belonged to the shadows and to me. I carefully closed the great leather volume, its cover cool against my palms, and slid it back into its rightful place upon the cedar shelf. The work of the chronicler is never truly finished. It is simply passed from one hand to another, a quiet torch carried through the dark. As I prepared to leave the scriptorium, I took one final look at the endless rows of books, resting silently in the dim morning light. The shadows were retreating now, revealing the true scale of the hall, the thousands of bindings that held the collective memory of our species. The peace I found here would stay with me, an inner sanctuary that no storm could disturb. a quiet harbor in a world that never stops moving. I gathered my coat, blew out the final flickering wick, and stood for a moment in the perfect twilight of the morning archive. The rain had completely stopped, leaving only the clean, crisp scent of a new day washing over the ancient stone courtyard outside. I turned the key in the heavy iron lock, leaving the ancient texts to their peaceful, uninterrupted sleep.